but yeah, it was a kind of thing where to take a step back again, months are passing, 2, 3, 4, 6 months. I'm not hearing anything. So I try and reach out again. At that point, I was really having issues trying to contact the sponsor. They were just like, no phones were being answered. So then, your heart really starts to sink at that point. And you're like, oh, I knew it kind of thing.
Well, I want to introduce our guest today. This is Brent Sanders, and I'm so grateful for Brent's willingness to come on our show and to discuss the topic that we're going to talk about today. Brent, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Deana. Appreciate it. Appreciate the offer.
Good. So Brent, why don't you give us a little flyover of summary of who you are, where you hail from, and then we'll kind of get into the story that you're going to share today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Brent Sanders. I'm from southeastern Pennsylvania, a little ways outside of Philadelphia.
So tell us a little bit about your professional career and maybe a little bit about your family and what life looks like for you.
Yeah, so I am a W-2 employee. I've worked at the same company, in fact, 20 years now.
Amazing.
Yeah, I guess. So it is a good thing. It's funny because the company I work for, there's been a lot of ability to move around. So even though I've been at the same company, I've had a lot of different roles within that company, which is good because keeps things real, mixed up a little bit. My family, I have a beautiful wife, 3 children, all just, they are my life, my happiness.
And how old are your kids?
They are 18, 15, and 11. So
Okay.
2 girls and a boy.
Very nice. Very nice. I have the opposite. I have 2 boys and a girl. We're not quite into the high school phase yet, but I'll be calling you.
Our oldest just started college this year.
Oh, man.
So that's quite the experience.
Exciting. The reason that I asked you to come to the show today is you and I had a call and you were sharing something with me. And this is a topic I think is incredibly important. I think most investors think of it. It actually probably prevents a lot of investors from investing in what they perceive as alternative investments. I think this is something that we need to talk about. We need to educate ourselves on. We discovered both you and I have experience in this particular topic, and that topic is fraud and what happens when we enter into an investment that is a fraud. Would love to hear the story. And then just let's talk about, looking back in hindsight, what kind of wisdom, what kind of questions would you ask, and how can you help other investors, number one, who are struggling with this very topic or who may be deciding not to invest because they're afraid of this? And then moving forward, what are some due diligence questions that can be discussed? And don't need to memorize that in order, but would love to just invite you. Let's start with the question. How did you get involved in alternative investing, real estate syndication, or whatever else you're in? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the things you're invested in and how you entered into those opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always been just like many people in the stock market. Right. That was all I knew. Absolutely all I knew. Have the 401k, right? So everything there is in equities in the stock market. I have, a couple Roth IRAs, everything was in the stock market. And it was the kind of thing, oh man, like looking back, it's so frustrating, right? Because there's no control there, at least from my expertise in stock trading. Right. And I'm sure there's people out there that, that's what they do and they make lots of money doing it, and all the power to them. I'm not one of them. So. But
you're probably a majority sample of the rest of us.
I think so. Yeah. That's kind of the taste I get. But it's a thing where everything was in stocks and I wanted to get out of it. I wanted away from it just because I appreciate control, or at least as much as, in that part of my life anyway, things you can control. And I felt the finances were one piece of the puzzle that I had zero control over and I wanted more. So I started looking into alternative investments. I had a couple of years back with what we're talking about now with this fraud case where I wanted to get out of the stock market, so did, and therefore was going to have a large taxable event that year from cashing in my stock equities. So that's kind of what drove me to really start looking for alternative investments. And at the time I was listening to a podcaster, and I'm obviously not going to go into any details of whom, or because in fact, this fraud case is still ongoing with the class action settlement. At any rate, so I was looking for something else. And at that point, I just had no idea about the whole alternative investment world or landscape. So yeah, started talking with people, was quickly advised to put my funds from the cash out in the stock into this particular investment. It was an oil and gas investment.
Okay, wait, pause. This was your first alternative investment out? Oh man.
First
Okay.
one.
Okay.
Yep.
And you're advised to quickly put your funds in, and who was advising you?
It was through
The
a
operator.
podcaster that I was listening to pretty regularly. And, it's kind of crazy. You listen to podcasts, and I don't know if other people have this same type of reaction, but you almost feel like you form a relationship, and I'm not getting weird or anything, not like a true relationship, obviously, but
no, but it brings comfort to your day. It's a familiar voice. It somehow is kind of baked into the rhythm of driving to work or going for a walk. And yeah, I get that.
You got it. Yep. So, and even, to the point where I've had conversations a number of times with this particular, anyway, and I want to be very, very clear that I'm not at all placing blame or nothing negative whatsoever against my association with this podcaster, or, that's the kind of thing too, because you can be told to jump headfirst into things, but ultimately it's your decision, right, to do these things, and you learn as you go. And I know I'm getting long-winded, apologies for that, but so
no, this is a good story. It's unfolding. Yeah. Keep going.
so I did jump into this first investment without doing like any due diligence, pretty much, right? Like I did some of the background research on the actual sponsor, on the outfit that was sponsoring this oil and gas investment. I tried to learn about oil and gas investing from a high level, did some of those things, but as far as actually picking up the phone and talking to the sponsor directly, or trying to just get a gauge on the personality of the sponsor, any of that, didn't do it. Just basically blind trust. I went online, basically filled out the form, wired the money, and hoped for the best, basically.
Okay. So your interaction, just so I understand the story and the storyline, was that you listened to a podcast of somebody who was recommending this particular investment.
Correct.
Okay. And you went to the website and then you just signed up.
Pretty much.
I mean, you did some high level research. Okay.
Exactly,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But and it's the kind of thing too, you look back, and this wasn't that long ago. But you feel like once you dive into this world and dive into the world of investing, you feel like, there's so much content out there, so much information, even like you guys, right? Like how much you offer for free to just like absorb yourself in. And, that's something I just didn't do any of that. I didn't know any better at the time. So basically jumped in blindly, did my first, investment. And it's the kind of thing, looking back now, the communication, you expect a certain amount of communication from sponsors. You expect them to kind of let you know how things are going. In hindsight, there was minimal, or I would almost say none of that happening.
For the first, how long?
Well, probably for really the entirety of the investment. There was this, like at first there were a few, there was supposed to be monthly income coming in, like a bit of a cash flow type scenario. There was at first minimal stuff, just like, dollars coming in here and there. And it's like, okay, well, at least something's happening. So that's good. And then eventually those monthly distributions moved to quarterly. So I'm like, a little odd, but okay. And I did talk with my contact who had suggested this outfit, and was told that basically there are some cash flow issues happening, but I was never contacted by the actual outfit themselves. No communication there. So as time went on, the distributions eventually ceased, and I would reach out to what little contact information I had to try and find out, what was going on. I did have a conversation or two and was, assured that things are fine. They're just moving along. This is how this type of investment goes. Didn't really think much more about it. I didn't really know what to think of it, quite honestly.
Were you getting any feelings of like, were you just thinking, I'm just new at this, I just simply don't understand the process? Or were you starting to get those underpinning feelings of dread where you're like, this is not good?
All of the above.
Okay.
Yeah. At first I was like, well, I guess this is just how these things work. This is how it goes. Always had that kind of sinking feeling like, pretty sure I'm never going to see this, this money.
Did you
again.
have that feeling after you wired the money, or no? It wasn't until a little later.
At first, when you first wire the money, you just have what I would
scary.
associate as nerves, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah, it's like you click that button, you're like, there we go. Please, please, please. But it was received, obviously. So I'm like, okay, well, that's good. At least it went to where I intended it to go. All these things, the first time you're doing it, you just have no idea, right? It's just like grasping at hope and just hoping that it works out. But yeah, it was a kind of thing where to take a step back again, months are passing, 2, 3, 4, 6 months. I'm not hearing anything. So I try and reach out again. At that point, I was really having issues trying to contact the sponsor. They were just like, no phones were being answered. So then, your heart really starts to sink at that point. And you're like, oh, I knew it kind of thing. I reached out to my contact that had advised of this investment. Actually, take a step back. I got a notice in the mail about this class action settlement that was happening with the sponsor, and there it all kind of came.
That's how you were notified from the court.
Yes, that's exactly how I was notified. Yeah. So then I reached out to my contact and was kind of given the backstory there. And it's crazy because the thing here is, I say about doing due diligence, and I absolutely didn't do any, but looking back and after kind of getting more of the history of this investment, my contact that, steered me in this direction did actually go out to the oil fields, to the wells, visited with them, but like knew the sponsor, had that contact. And that was kind of where in my head, okay, so I trust this person trusts this person, we're good. Right. And again, it's not to say that anyone, besides these people directly involved in this class action settlement were doing this intentionally or for malicious reasons, right? So I'm not saying that at all. I think maybe my contact that I had was just as much surprised as I was, of what was actually going on behind the scenes.
So here's a question.
Please, yeah.
Do you think that this is an example of somebody who started with good intentions and just got behind and then just couldn't, catch up, and then it turned into that? Or do you know, or do you think that this was somebody who started out this road with fraudulent intentions?
Yeah, I don't know, to put it simply.
Okay.
It's a kind of thing where you always like to hope the best in people, right? And if I'm going to do myself any good, maybe I'll choose to believe that they weren't malicious people, that they weren't doing this on purpose. But that being said, from what I understand of the class action settlement, there was movement between funds. There were movement of funds to pay off funds, Ponzi scheme type stuff going on. So if I'm being real, I think there could be, malicious intent to this. But time will tell. Well, this kind of thing I don't want to say either way just because I don't know. Still very, very involved in alternative investments and have done quite a number since that time. But you almost look back and think, okay, well, this sucks. But in the scheme of things, it's a really, really good life lesson because you hear this kind of stuff a lot, right? At least like even take, for example, today's environment, right? Okay, so the Fed shoots up interest rates. All of a sudden, people who a year ago, 2 years ago, year and a half, whatever, thought they were in pretty sound investments as far as multifamily goes, all of a sudden they're getting these cash calls. They're getting these calls from their sponsors saying, sorry, but this has never happened in history. This amount and velocity of rate hikes. we just didn't plan for this. And it's the kind of thing, okay, so even if you did talk to that sponsor a year and a half ago and you felt good about them as a person, you felt like you're doing your due diligence, they've had, X number of deals in the past that closed, well, all of a sudden here we are. And you could, even worse than a cash call, you could lose your whole investment again. So, and I don't mean to say this to like completely spook new investors. But I think we have to go into these environments and these situations knowing that there's that possibility. And I think you can only do so much. Now I say that, I know, like, I kind of like have this thing in my head going back and forth, like, don't do it, but do it. Because how else are you going to live these days? You can't put your money into a savings account and think that's going to do anything for you. So you almost like have to step into this space and learn it, right? Or build the relationships with people like yourself, build those networks with people you trust. And I think that said, you can mitigate this risk of losing your money to a very, very large extent. Is kind of where my head is today. It might change tomorrow. But
I'd like to go back to a moment in time where after you had made that first investment, how long after it was it until you deployed your second investment? Did you know that this investment was not going well, or were you still in process of waiting for it to pay out?
At the time that I did I kind of did that oil and gas investment and another life settlements investment together, not together, but at the same time.
Okay.
Which they were both advising me from the same person, that life settlements investment is going great. So that's a little silver lining there. After that first initial 2 investments into the alternative asset class, it took me about maybe a year, 18 months or so until I made my next investment. And that was in a multifamily value add. But there again, I didn't do even the due diligence at that point in time with that investment that I am doing now. Like, it's the investments that I'm making now, I absolutely talk with the sponsor many times before making the investment, really trying to understand, read through the PPM, literally read through it, almost line for line.
All 90 pages.
Yeah, right. Almost. But I do
part.
very, oh my gosh, it's crazy. I spend a lot of time reading, but you kind of enjoy it, or at least I kind of enjoy it in a weird kind of a way. Just because unless you do that, I don't think you can really fully appreciate the strategy, the investment strategy, and really truly understanding like how this thing is structured. Whether you're looking at the debt stack, whether so many things to learn about, so many things to consider, and so many questions to ask sponsors, again, that I just didn't even know to ask, back a few years. But again, just like the amount of content that's out there, the amount of information that's out there just for the taking is just, it's incredible. It's such a different world than it was even 5 years ago.
So let's talk about that. The questions that you ask the sponsors. Part of it, we all have this human instinct. Some of us have a stronger gut sense than others, but when you're talking to somebody, you can get that, like, I feel tense, I don't know why, or it can put you at ease. Like, what are the indicators for you? Like, number one, what are some of the questions that you think are really important to ask when you vet sponsors? Number two, is there anything else that you look to aside from how they answer the questions as you determine whether this is somebody that you want to trust with your investment funds?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it. So as far as the questions, it's the ones that you can Google questions you should ask indicators. It's a lot of the normal stuff, but a lot of stuff that's in the investment summaries will kind of review and understand what their business plan is. That said, if you were to ask, a sponsor again 2 years ago, what how are you going to pay for, what's your debt strategy here? How are you? And they said, okay, well, we're projecting that in a worst case scenario, interest rates are going to rise by 100 basis points or 200, whatever. And you'd have been fine with that, because who would have known? Like, who knew that And that's okay. Yep, sounds good. But I guess, I mean, obviously, there's people much smarter than me out there that are running these businesses and doing well with them, right? And there are people who have been in this business for decades, and I think that's one of the most important things for me. Now, that's not to say that some of the new sponsors out there shouldn't be trusted, because that's obviously absolutely not the case. But for me, a lot of the trust I'm going to put in someone is experience. You know, it's, you know, did they just jump into this game, you know, in the last 5 years, or have they been in for 10, 15, 20 years doing this, seeing these ups and downs that we go through, and almost forecasting as best anyone can some of these insanity type situations that we find ourselves in today, right?
Right.
Again, I get it. No one's ever going to be able to, you know, it's a whole crystal ball thing. You just don't know what you don't know. But I think when you're in the game long enough, you know that playing this game conservative is probably in your best interest. So I look for that a lot. And I know too, everyone says that, yeah, we underwrite very conservatively. And that's kind of, you know, the token phrase, but do you really, right? And to look at the numbers and to learn enough about the investment to be able to confidently look at the numbers, I think is a big deal, right? And that probably goes without saying. You mentioned the gut feel, and I try to stay away from that, but you know, I think it's just human nature, right? The large
Are there
extent.
things that you feel, I mean, sometimes the strategy is to answer questions and then to see what is left out in a discussion. Are there certain things that you want to hear that you kind of give space for in an interview process that you're looking for or hoping for, that are at times left out that you wish were covered?
Maybe the only thing that comes to mind really is where they did screw up, right? Like where they dropped the ball and how they managed with that, how they avoided losing, you know, their investors' money, right? Because everyone at some point or another, again, unless they're very, very new, is going to experience challenges, right? And we all do. Even in like I have my single family investments that, you know, you're always dealing with something, right? And I could share a ton of those stories, but that's neither here nor there. So those are always good to hear for me, to understand that this is actually, you know, a real person that has real experiences, and to see how they dealt with them.
So would you say, where they have failed in the past, would you say that that's a common factor that investors would overlook the question? Or do you think there are other commonly overlooked questions to ask sponsors when you're vetting them?
I think that probably is often overlooked and probably should be at the top of the list as far as a question that you want to understand more about. But yeah, something that, you know, until recently I didn't really think to ask. You know, you look at the summary, the investment summary, the PPM, everything looks good, and you know, you kind of jump into it. And to understand more of that background, I think, is hugely important.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for somebody who you think is who may be in that kind of a situation where, what would you do next time, knowing what you know now, where there's no communication, there's nobody answering the phones, there's nobody returning emails? I mean, is that really what you experienced? Just like nothing?
That is exactly right. Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that, because, you know, and it's funny, I often think in my mind about, you know, this age that we're in, this electronic age, and how easy it is just for things to go and they're gone, kind of thing. And I know I shouldn't let myself think that way, but you even look at like, even, you know, the stuff that's happening today, with the banking system and this and that, and just, you know, apparently it's being dealt with and resolved to some fashion, but it's just so crazy how quickly things can just go away. And you know, if we try and log in one day, and I know this is being, there's a term for this, conspiracy theorist or whatever, where you try and log into your account, you know, in your banking, and all of a sudden it's just not there anymore. You're like, what happened? What just happened? You know, and it's like, what do? There's no numbers to call. There's no emails to write, that's not being answered or it's being sent back. It's kind of a scary thing to think about, so therefore, and it's funny, I talked to my wife about this and she's like, you're just being silly, you're being, whatever, like, again, just that conspiracy theorist about that's never going to happen. How could that happen? But I don't know. I sometimes let myself get too wrapped up in thinking that way. And I don't take it too seriously, but to answer your question, I guess, what do you do
Yeah.
when you're not getting
Well, I
that
would say
communication?
you can connect with the Securities and Exchange Commission,
Ah,
as a step. You did reach out to the person who referred you. Did that person also invest?
they did.
They
Yeah.
did. Okay. So at least you weren't just on your own out there.
And that's another good point I do want to put out there is that person that helped me or that directed me to the investment has been very supportive in
Mhm,
this situation, as far as kind of bringing my attention to some of the notices that are being sent out that are related to the class action suit.
mhm.
So again, I don't mean to come across at all like I'm feeling betrayed by that particular um, by my contact. So I just wanted to
Sure.
kind of make that clear.
So in terms of communication with the investments
Mhm.
that you currently have, what do you appreciate? What makes you feel assured and encouraged? What are the things that you like when you work with the operators that you're involved with? Talk to us about how you feel assured.
It's absolutely communication, right? That
Mhm,
is so hugely important. Just those emails that you get, even those calls sometimes that you get, are just so reassuring to know that there's still like someone out there on that other side, on the other end, that's working
mm,
for your investment. And to know that in a lot of these investments, the sponsors are invested as well, right? They're playing the game right alongside of you. Um, but really just that those emails, and of course it's nice to see those distributions come in as well. But yeah, hands down, it's a communication, just kind of keeping in touch with the sponsor, or vice versa. Really, two-way communication is hugely important.
yeah, good. Well, thinking beyond investment and thinking beyond, or just even a little bit about some financial freedom, what are some of the things that you think about? I'm kind of changing the subject a little bit just to get a little bit more into your world, but obviously you have a family. And so what were some of your long-term goals for your family in pivoting to some alternative investments?
Yeah, definitely passing on legacy. So, and it's a great question. Thank you. It's one thing I also am involved in is whole life, um, the
Okay.
whole life insurance,
Yeah.
where you have the high cash value. That's something I got in a few years ago, and just for the exact reason that you're inquiring about now, is really that family legacy, is to be able to pass on, not only money, to the kids and to my wife, should I pass earlier, but also really the financial lessons
Mm-hmm.
that are around that. And
So good.
you're, as far as the whole, the high cash value whole life, that's a whole nother game in itself, right? Where it takes a lot of time and understanding to really get it, like to understand that process. And I imagine there's a high likelihood that a lot of your audience probably has at least heard of it if they aren't doing it themselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you use the arbitrage of the whole life cash value to make your investments, right? Or as your security fund, or as your whatever, right? So that's something I've been actively doing for a little while now, and it's been working out very well. But it's the kind of thing you need discipline to do that. It's a long-term game, right? Well, I should say anything, but almost any good thing in life is not a quick fix. It's a long-term deal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so I do think a lot about teaching my kids about money, because it's something that unfortunately is not taught, in my opinion, very well in the school system, or at least in the public school system,
Mm-hmm.
which my kids are a part of. So, I try and hand down some of the books that I really enjoy reading, or feel
Mm-hmm.
like I get a lot of value from, and just have that open conversation with them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
What are some of those books that come to mind right away when you think about the ones you've really enjoyed that you've passed down to your kids?
You put you on the spot here a little. It's, well, of course, the Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad. Everyone always says that, and for good reason, right? I
Yeah.
was just listening this morning to a podcast on my way into work, and that was brought up again. Like, what is the seminal, investment book? And it's actually with Brandon Turner, and he was talking about how he was giving it to his wife and this and that for her to read, and they had this whole back and forth. But that's definitely one of the books, and I actually did get my two daughters that book for Christmas this past year. Now, I don't think they've started reading it yet, and it's funny because I'm thinking about how to really kind of nudge that interest in money and investing, because it's not there yet. It's clearly not there yet with my kids, but they see myself, and I work, I shouldn't say work. My brother-in-laws, they're very much into alternative investments and whole life and all these things that we're talking about now. So, we're always having conversations at the dinner table, and just conversations. We do a lot of trail running, so we'll talk about it then, and we'll bring it back home and talk about it in front of my kids. So they're very exposed to it, but they just don't have that interest in it yet. So we're working towards that.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. I mean, that's something I think is a really great question. As a parent with younger kids, even, I'm with you. I mean, well, my dad did, I've mentioned this on the show several times, that my dad was a real estate developer. And so he was always talking about leverage and this, that, and the other. But in terms of practicality, giving tools so that they know how to run, so
So
I think
important.
Sometimes, like, the fraud is unavoidable. In some cases, you can do your due diligence, like I was mentioning a previous conversation about Madoff, which is the Netflix miniseries. I also think we have to consider the question of, okay, so let's just think, if we lose everything, I think, what is our reaction going to be to that? How are we going to respond? Is he going to tip our lives upside down? Are we going to lose joy of living every day? Is that going to wipe out our future? Kind of asking some of the bigger questions in life, and not letting everything about our well-being ride on the success of certain investments that we make. What do you think about that?
Great point. And you and I both have obviously had to deal with this directly, where all of a sudden you realize, well, we knew this was possible, and here we are. It's all gone. And it's like, well, you can take one of two paths. You can sulk in it and get depressed about it. And sure, there is a bit of that maybe at first, and a bit of that,
and dig a hole in the backyard.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Or you can, learn from it, right? Which is, I think, what both you and I have chosen to do, right? And that's really, I mean, obviously, I think his only logical sense is to try and find that silver lining, and just, again, moving forward, look back and say, oh, don't want to do that again. Or now I know to ask these questions, and or to vet my sponsor that are this and that. But to your point, it's, and well, one other point I would make with that is, obviously, choose wisely, but then only invest what you can afford to lose. Because obviously we don't want to ever lose anything if we don't have to, but understanding that it's a possibility, just, invest smart and don't put your entire life savings into something that could go away.
Right. And almost kind of like, envisioning what it would be like if you didn't have that, and are you going to be okay? And I think just maintaining relationships is so important. If it gets in the way of your marriage, if it gets in the way of your own future and how you interact with people, I mean, that's something to consider as well. You don't want that to rob you of what the rest of your life can afford.
Exactly.
Not that we should plan on losing our investment money. I'm not promoting that at all. But there's a lot of things in our life that we can't control. We just can control how we respond to them. So I think it's always important to remember that. My husband and I actually just had a date last night. We had a stay date. All the kids went to bed because our kids are still sort of small. And we actually talked about that over steak. We just talked about, if we lose our house, if we were to do this, if all of this, we would still be happy. And there's something, I think, powerful and significant about saying that out loud, not only to yourself or to God, but to the people that you love. And just, you never know what's going to happen.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I love it. Yeah. It's,
Okay.
I'm reading a book right now about, it's more, I forget what the title, actually, I don't have it here, about living and dying, which
Oh,
you may think, oh, that sounds a little depressing, right? But it's not. It's like, just gives so much of a beautiful way of looking at things, a different way of looking at things. And to your point about, if we were to lose all our money tomorrow, how would we be,
right.
And I've actually thought about that exact line of thinking just last night, in fact, from a part I was reading. And yeah, you can think that money it helps us to, it can bring a lot of good things into our lives, no doubt, right? But if you don't have it, I think you can be just as happy, right? And there's obviously people out there that are rich beyond all belief, but not happy. And it's the whole idea of wealth. What is wealth really? Well, there's many different definitions of it. And as long as you have, maybe your health, your happiness, people you love around you, there you go.
Yeah. I love the addition to that. I would agree that I think that we're entrusted with wealth for the good of those around us, promoting human flourishing and things like that. And that kind of goes into this question of our bigger why. So, number one, are we going to be happy if we don't have it? Number two, if we are going to have it, I think it's so helpful to decide beforehand. Number one, how much is enough? Number two, anything beyond that, or even within that, what is it that we want to do to move the needle on, human flourishing in the world? So whether that's within your own family or beyond, I think those are important questions.
They are. Couldn't agree more. And not to say, again, I started this podcast saying how I've been in the same company 20 years, W-2 job. I often do think about, had I understood more about this space, about whether it's syndications, whether it's just any kind of alternative investment, self-directing, the IRAs, all these things that we learn about or have the opportunity to learn about. If I had known about them, 20 years ago, you just kind of wonder where you'd be. Not that I'm complaining at all about.
No, I've thought this
my
through
life.
myself. Yeah.
Yeah, but it kind of like makes you just think about, well, if I can at least take this knowledge and pass this on to our kids.
Normalize it.
Exactly.
This
Thank
is
you.
a normal part of everyday life.
But risk is just such an important topic even to have with the kids, because I think our children, I think it's the kind of thing where, as far as our mindsets as adults and having had these life experiences, obviously we've dealt with risk more, where the kids, and they shouldn't have to think about these kinds of things yet. But I think for us to have that conversation with them and introduce risk factors and cases exactly like what you and I have experienced is hugely important and really a good life lesson for them, and definitely.
Yeah. And I've discovered my kids, their favorite stories are about my failures.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever, even as little kids, and I'd be putting them to bed, they'd be like, "Mommy, tell me about a story when you got hurt." I would have these epic stories of blood and, accident on a bike when I was a kid.
Love it.
And
Love
so
it.
somehow they got really into these stories when I failed, and not because they were celebrating my failure, but because I think they could relate to it. It was more exciting than, this day I did this and I achieved this. That's really boring for them because it doesn't always compute or translate. So, yeah, I mean, I have that 20 minutes of sacred time every morning where I'm driving my kids to school. They're buckled in. They can't go anywhere. I'm controlling the music. It's turned off. Think about telling them stories of investment and where I failed. That's going to be a good next step. That's my action item for today. I mean, I tell them stories about multifamily investment too. They're aware of all of this language and the lingo because they hear me talking about it all the time. So,
yeah.
So that's good. Let's do that. Let's tell our kids.
I'm with you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Brent, thank you so much. I just want to commend you for your courage in sharing this. I think somebody in your shoes could easily just not want to share this story for obvious reasons. I mean, I haven't shared this story, mine. You don't want to parade about, oh, I invested in this deal and there was fraud, but really people can learn a lot from it. So thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed talking with you and being on the show. And I really, it's been great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we have some marching orders, some storytelling to do, and some due diligence items as well. So you also gave us some very practical and useful tips moving forward, working with sponsors. So for that, thank you so much, Brent. I appreciate you being our guest.
Me too. The feeling is mutual. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.